Hello again and welcome back to the channel. So in this box here, I've got an all-grain beer kit that I'm going to be doing a review on, and Brewday. I've been sent this very kindly by Brewday, which is a relatively new company operating out of Nottingham, who supply beer kits and all sorts of other brewing supplies. So do please go and check them out. And the reason why I'm quite excited about brewing this particular kit is it's been put together in collaboration with Raptor. So Nottingham brewery that a lot of you may have heard of already, knocking out all sorts of big hazy IPAs and pale ales, quite a few sour beers and things like that as well, imperial stout, so the usual kind of craft beer offerings, and they are local to Nottingham as well. So Brewday and Raptor have got together to put this kit together based on a beer that they've also released commercially, so you can brew the beer, buy the beer, compare the two and see how you get on. And obviously the recipe is direct from the brewery, so it should be true to the original beer, just scaled down. This kit is available for £30 on the Brewday website, and I won't go into the exact recipe details, but based on the amount of hops that are in it and some of the other ingredients here for a 23 litre batch, I think already that that's really good value. So do go and check them out. I'll put the link in the description below, and yeah, we'll see how the beer comes out, but I'm sure it's going to be good. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the contents of the kit. Already, first impressions are really good. It's all really nicely packaged, labelled up, very clear what's what. And the instructions, which I haven't fully read through yet, but at a glance look really detailed and clear. So I won't give the exact numbers for all of this, for obvious reasons. Go and buy the kit if you want to make the beer. But in the grain bill, we've got extra pale malt, flake torrefied oats, naked oat malt, wheat malt, carapils, flake torrefied barley. So the amount of oats, wheat, and extra adjuncts in there, we're already looking at, we can tell that's going to be a very hazy beer straight away. We've got 500 grams of maltodextrin, so extra unfermentable sugars from that, which will add to the body and sort of fullness of the beer. We'll be using this quake yeast here, so I was interested to find out, while corresponding with Matt, that Raptor actually use quake as their house yeast. And then the hops, so there's nearly 400 grams total of hops. There's a very small bittering addition of Bravo in there somewhere, and then we've got some Azaka, Chinook, Citra, Mochuika, and Waiti. So there's a whole bunch of New World, New Zealand and American hops in there, which look really good. Big Whirlpool edition, big dry hop edition, as you'd expect, and a little bit very late in the boil as well. A couple of little coasters there from Brewday, and a lovely Neon Raptor, let's get it the right way up, shall we? Neon Raptor sticker there for the beer fridge as well, which will make all the difference. So I'll just give you the sort of overall stats for the brew in terms of what we're aiming for with this. So 23 litre batch, OG 1059, final grav 1020, 5.1%, based on 72% efficiency, 18 IBU, so again very low for your sort of hazy, kind of New England pale style. One interesting thing there, 60-minute infusion mash at 70 degrees, so very high mash temperature, but based on what we're looking at for the final gravity and the fact that I know quake yeast will go through the fermentables like a train anyway, that kind of makes sense to me, even though you might look at that initially and think that's a little bit odd. So yeah, I'm going to go through those numbers and plug them into my software and see how that all stacks up, and obviously get onto the Brewday and then go through the instructions in a little bit more detail in terms of how well they work and how it all matches up to what I experience when I make the kit. But like I said, overall, first impressions, really good. Looks like a really nicely put together kit. Some pretty premium ingredients in there, and yeah, I'm quite excited to make this. So let's get into the brewing. So Brewday is on. The HLT is just coming up to strike temperature, and over here I've plugged these numbers into Brewfather, and it looks pretty much bang on. There's obviously always going to be some minor differences depending on your setup and everything, but the differences are very, very minor. So there's like 1 point on the final gravity, So the ABV is slightly higher and the IBUs is like 2 points difference. But as far as the guidelines in terms of the numbers for the kit, it's bang on. So really impressed with that. So the instructions we have here are pretty detailed. So you've got your basic kind of process from mashing. Obviously, as said before, all brewing systems will vary, so this is just a rough guide, and you will almost certainly have to adapt some of that for your own system depending on what you're using. The instructions here are based on what you'd expect to see if you were using a Grainfather G13. Actually, that comes out pretty close to how my system operates as well. So again, the numbers in all of this look really good. And there's some additional tips here from Neon Raptor themselves, talking specifically about hop rousing. I'm going to look at a solution for that with the all-rounder in a bit that I'll show you at the end of the video, hopefully. And that's talking about them injecting CO2 to basically push the hops back up into suspension. Day one hop additions for biotransformation, so doing that at fermentation temperature, but then dropping the temperature down for the second dry hop. So it's actually a double dry hopped beer, this one. 17 degrees suggested here. I normally go for about sort of 12 to 14, so I'll probably stick with my usual method for that. Under pitching the yeast. So yes, I have seen other people brewing with this yeast and pitching a whole packet and having it go off like an absolute train, almost explosive kind of fermentation. So I think that's probably definitely a good idea, and I'll probably chuck in half the packet at most, to be honest. And then there's a little bit of guidance on the brewing water as well. So an idea there of the chloride to sulfate ratio, which, as I expected for a big hazy beer like this, is very heavily in favor of the chloride. So they're suggesting about 250 to 100 ppm. I've plugged that into the software as well, and it is a little bit tricky getting to those sort of numbers. So if you are new to water chemistry and everything, that might be a bit of a challenge, but it is kind of crucial to this sort of style of beer. So one thing I would say, looking at all this, and this is no criticism of the kit or the instructions itself at all, but I would say that this is a fairly complex brew. There's some things that you will need to be able to do it as per the instructions, like temperature control for fermentation in order to get the high temperatures for the Quake yeast, the Voss yeast in this case. You need to be on point with water chemistry, ideally, if you can, and all sorts of other things. So I probably wouldn't suggest this as being an ideal kit if it's like your first go at all grain brewing, shall we say. So this is maybe a little bit more advanced in terms of some of the stuff that you might want to be looking at in order to get the most out of it, especially when you start getting into the kind of more advanced tips that you have there on the second page. But again, otherwise, this set of instructions is clear and helpful to me in terms of how to approach this brew. So we're just mashing in, and so far so good. Strike temp was about 78, 77 degrees. Oh, there goes the focus. So we're aiming for 70 degree mash temperature, and I'd say that's pretty good. So there's our first run-ins going into the kettle, and I've got my 3 grams of Bravo for the first wort hops. Now I know these are only a teeny tiny bittering addition, but these are really stinky aromatic hops. I haven't used Bravo for a while, but might have to try those out again in something else. So I've just dropped the temperature down to 80 centigrade. Got our whirlpool going, and we've got our Citra and Waiiti whirlpool hops, which are going for 20 minutes. These smell super fresh and fruity, so look like good quality hops going in there. 20 minutes, and then we'll just chill it down and get it into the fermenter. So there we have it into the FV. We are pretty close to the expected volume, just about half a litre off, which is not surprising with the amount of whirlpool hops in there. And I'm just going to chuck in, well, guesstimate about half a packet of this. maybe a bit more. All right, that should be plenty. And yeah, knowing quake yeast, that'll probably be thumping away in about an hour or two. So our gravity OG has come in around about 1054. Looking at that, and you can see it's super murky already. Looking at that grain bill, it's got, if you include the flaked barley, about 40% either oats or wheat or flaked barley in there. So there's a hell of a lot of that, you know, the sort of stuff that isn't necessarily going to give you the best efficiency. So I'm not surprised that I've lost a few points there. So we're 5 points down on the target gravity, working at brew house efficiency of 72%. So you know, this will vary with different equipment. Maybe my setup with the batch sparging and, you know, fairly basic sort of approach to the sparge and mash and everything. No recirculation is not the best for extracting maximum value out of a grain bill like this. But that would probably be my only quibble at this point, is maybe because of the grain bill, for a homebrew scale, you might need to work for a slightly lower brew house efficiency target. But it shouldn't make a big difference. We're probably going to be looking at maybe half a percentage point at most in terms of the final gravity difference. It's not the final gravity, sorry, the final ABV difference, which shouldn't make much difference, I wouldn't think. So yeah, that's the beer, and we're into the fermentation fridge here. Got it set to a toasty 36 degrees. So we're about 4 hours in, and as you can see, I'm not sure if it's actually picking it up there. There you go. Got the full snow globe in effect. Pretty decent sized Krausen forming as well already. Look at that bubbling away. Yeah, so quite doing its thing. So morning after brew day, and it's time to add the first dry hop. So these are the biotransformation dry hops. Temperature's still at 36 degrees. I wouldn't normally dry hop in a beer this warm, but that's what the instructions say, so we'll go with it. And you can see why they need to go on day one, because the quake is already starting to, or the fermentation is starting to drop back a little bit. So the Krausen's kind of gone. It's still bubbling away pretty furiously, but I mean, this looks like it's probably going to be done in sort of 2 or 3 days at this current rate. So we'll get these hops in and then leave it until it's fermented out, and then we'll drop the temperature for the second dry hop. So 2 days in, most of the really visible activity seems to have finished. There's still a few bubbles, but not much. Interestingly, all the hops seem to be sitting on the top of the beer at the minute, probably because of the high temperature it's at. So there's no need to use the CO2 rousing tube at the minute. There's a little bit on the bottom, but not much. So I thought I'd check gravity, and after just 2 days, probably even less than 2 days actually, because it's only just morning at the minute, it's down at 1017. So this has been chilled down to 14 degrees, and you can see those hops have disappeared off of the top there, and that's all sunk down to the bottom. You can't really see much of what's going on because this is such a murk bomb. But I'm going to try out that hop rousing tube that I mentioned earlier and give it a quick blast of CO2. So you can see that bubbling up from the bottom there. And again, it's pretty hard to see exactly what's going on because it's so opaque, but there is loads of hop matter and yeast and all sorts of other stuff flying around there. So anyway, we'll give those a quick rouse, and then what I'm going to do is add the second dry hop. So this is the one we do at a slightly cooler temperature, Citra Mochuica. So this has been cold crashing for a couple of days, and we're just doing a closed transfer into the keg over here. get that on the gas in the keezer, and hopefully be drinking it in a few days. This has literally only been 6 days, I think, since I brewed it, so super quick with the Quake yeast. And there we have the finished article. As you can see, very, very hazy, proper opaque beer, this one. Light yellow, kind of pineapple juice look to it, and holding a pretty nice thick head on the top. Yeah, looks good. So let's get into this one. It came out at 4.9% ABV in the end, so it's just 0.4% down on the predicted ABV due to the slightly lower OG that I got, which I mentioned earlier in the video. Don't think there's going to be any great harm done by that, to be honest. On the nose, it's not like punch you in the face aromatic, but it does have a lovely zesty, almost like a slightly creamy aroma to it as well, getting a little bit of a citrus, kind of almost a pina colada kind of thing there. Yeah, smells nice. Like I said, not massively pungent, but it does smell quite inviting. So without further ado, let's give it a taste. And then flavour wise, again, the kind of creaminess there, it's definitely got the body and thickness of a sort of New England style pale ale, but there's quite a zesty, kind of bright, citrusy flavour there as well. So it's kind of New England pale ale, but also some classic kind of American pale ale type flavours in it as well, which is nice sort of contrast between the two. This is only 2 weeks old, but to be honest, I was drinking this beer after 8 days in the keg and it was tasting really good. So I've not always been a big proponent of Quake yeast, shall we say, but you can't argue with the turnaround time on it. And it does seem, particularly with this beer especially, that, you know, if you want to get beer turned around, not just fermentation time, but conditioning time is definitely really quick with Quake, which in this case, I believe that the strain is Voss that they use at the brewery, and also the MJ Mangrove Jack's yeast that is in the kit. So it's very good for that if you want a quick beer turnaround. So yeah, there's a lot of citra, I think aroma and flavour, but then the other New Zealand hops in there, they're not the most pungent or dominating in terms of flavour. They just add this sort of like, there's a bit of lime in there, there's some soft stone fruit flavours. So I think Waiti is quite peachy, apricot if I remember rightly, and the Mochuika is very much more towards the sort of lime side of things, a little bit of a kind of herbal lime, citrusy type vibe, full body but still quite zesty and refreshing hop flavour coming through. There is some grapefruit there. It's not super low bitterness, so there is a bit of bitterness on the back end. The calculated IBUs were really low for this, but I think the dry hopping and the use of, I think particularly the Chinook in the dry hop, is giving you a little bit more of that perceived bitterness from the dry hop, which I actually quite like. I think it makes it more drinkable. Like I said, it gives it a little bit more of that kind of like old school American pale ale flavour profile, but then in contrast to the New England sort of malt bill and mouthfeel and body, which is actually working quite well for me. I've made some beer recently with Chinook in the dry hop, and it can give you quite a lot of pine and resin flavours, and there's a little bit of that in there, but it's not dominating it as much as I've sort of maybe feared that it might. And also the fact that the first dry hop was done at 36 degrees, so I was worried about that on the instructions, because it's generally not the advice that you would see online to do any kind of dry hopping at that temperature. So most dry hopping nowadays, people advise to sort of drop the temperature down below your fermentation temperature, and obviously with Quake yeast, that fermentation temperature is even higher, so you would be worried potentially about extracting some vegetal flavours, maybe more grassiness or green kind of taste from the hops. and perhaps even more of that bitter. Now, maybe there is a little bit more of the perceived bitterness from that, but I'm not getting that kind of nasty, like astringent vegetal flavour from it at all. So yeah, it's probably something that I wouldn't necessarily do as a matter of course, but it's worked okay in this beer, and perhaps the biotransformation stuff that's been going on because it was still in active fermentation has aided that in some way. I don't know, but the point is the instructions for the kit, followed them to the letter in terms of the schedule for dry hopping and the temperatures and stuff, except for the second dry hop. I did that a little bit lower, but it seems to have worked really well. So I think the jury's out on whether the hop rousing thing made much of a difference. I think I'd have to test that a little bit more, but I would say it's certainly not done it any harm. And I mean, all in all, it's just a really nice drinkable pale ale. Like I said, it's kind of a bit of a contrast between maybe a slightly more traditional pale ale kind of hop profile, but then the New England malt bill and body and hopping techniques and everything else. So yeah, good beer. I would definitely recommend this kit. Really happy with it. Thank you very much, Brewday and Neon Raptor, for putting this kit together, and to Matt at Brewday for sending me this kit to try out. Cheers, and get on the link at the bottom if you want to go and buy this kit and try it out for yourself. Thank you very much.
I'm the dude. So that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.